So we now are going to go to the panel focusing on the internet market in MENA. And so if he's here somewhere, I'll invite Usal to come on up, who's our moderator from GEP Turkey. Hey, how are you? Welcome. Thanks for being here. And we'll invite his panelists as well. So Omar Christidis from ArabNet, Ramez Mohammed from Flat6 Labs, Radi Al-Fasid from MENA Apps, and if he's here, Pamir Galembe from Hummingbird. I'm not sure if Pamir arrived or not. So guys, come on up to the stage, if you're here.
We don't have enough chairs.
We do need one more chair, I think.
Yeah, but there are four panels.
Usal, maybe it is just you and me. I don't know. Where's the... Okay, maybe they're all together. Why don't we do this? Okay. Very good. It's your turn.
Okay, we are already quite Middle Eastern in timing. Let's see how the session will go. Okay, Pamir is also here. Maybe he'll arrive a bit late. Thank you all for listening to us. Many people are outside, and as I said, we are already quite Middle Eastern in timing. But we have a very distinguished set of guests here. Let me introduce them briefly. Ramiz is from Egypt, and he's the CEO of Flat6 Labs, which is an accelerator program in Cairo. Omar is the head of ArabNet, which is in Lebanon. It's a networking organization like Ito, right? Radi is from MENA Apps, and it's an accelerator program in Jordan. And when he arrives, many people here already know Pamir, but he's a director at Hummingbird Ventures, which is based in Belgium, but Pamir has recently moved to Istanbul. So let me start with you guys. And my first question will be related to politics and entrepreneurship. Is he here? Okay, Pamir is also coming. So we have been seeing all these news stories about Arab Spring turning into Arab Winter and all this political drama going on in, all over Middle East. Yet we also see a lot of news stories about successful startups, new investments coming to the region. So how do you see this political thing and entrepreneurship going on together? Does politics affect entrepreneurship at all? What do you think?
I run, as you said, a kind of a conference business focused on the Arab markets, and when we've been doing this since 2010. In 2011, in March 2011, when we did our event, all that anyone wanted to ask us about was, oh, the Arab Spring, the Arab Spring. All of a sudden, then the internet business came into the spotlight. And what I think what happened here, and my perspective is specifically about Egypt because we then did an event there, and Ramiz, I'm sure we'll talk more about it, is I think that the Arab Spring opened up a lot of opportunities. I think that people, through the process of the revolutions, felt empowered, like it was their time to build something, to create something, now that they were successful in kind of getting their independence to some certain extent, that it was a time of optimism and energy. And I think that a lot of that was mobilized into the startup space. So I think we saw a tremendous amount of positive energy about the creation of companies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is it the same in Egypt?
Sure. Yeah, Egypt, I think, is the only country here that had a full revolution. I totally agree with Omar that revolution not necessarily like affected entrepreneurship. Maybe it's just like it was something that's parallel to the revolution. The same people who like went out in the streets, they want to do something in the future. They want to control their future. They have some hopes. They are like want to achieve something for their countries. And it's all about entrepreneurship. It's all about like how you would like to build an economy, you build your own business, and build a company where you recruit people and start business and start a new business.
Actually, Flat6 started before the revolution, right?
Actually, the agreement to start Flat6 Labs, Flat6 Labs is like a partnership between Sawari Ventures, the venture capital in Egypt, and the American University in Cairo. This agreement was signed on January 13th, 2011, which is like 12 days before the revolution. And the project was put on hold because of the revolution and the circumstances back then, and then it was revived in April, and we started our first cycle in October 2011, and since then we graduated 24 companies, and currently we're operating our fifth cycle.
So we did an event in October of that year in Cairo, and one thing I would say is that there was a tremendous interest in actually social entrepreneurship, and I think that's still there in Egypt. People were looking at creating companies with a double bottom line with impact to their communities.
Yeah, social entrepreneurship actually in Egypt is huge now. Like we have, especially we have many NGOs who are working in Egypt now, like Mercy Corps and Autad, and like we have many startup weekends events as well, like from like as a community, and people are trying to like make this balance between social and commercial as well. But mostly, of course, as a capitalist, we focus on like the commercial part of the business.
Same with you, Radi?
Yeah, but I would like to add also that it's just an extreme economic need as well. You know, so if you look at it from a demographic point of view, around 75% of the people in the region are below 35 years old. So, and a lot of jobs have to be created, and you have a highly educated community, but not enough jobs to get them to work. So that's, I think, also from the youth perspective, that's why the drive to entrepreneurship gives them a better way of finding employment.
Pamir, let me turn to you at this point. Do you think, so where is the opportunity in Arab market, given all these, you know, numbers and what's going on in the region?
So my perception of the opportunity in the market right now is mostly in countries that have high GDP per capita. And I'll give a few examples there, but for us we see mostly the opportunity in the Gulf markets. So that's obviously Saudi Arabia first and foremost, and then the connected countries in the Gulf. And we've seen this in several of the ventures that we got involved with. So with Peak Games, for example, on the gaming side, we saw that in Egypt, for example, we got great traction in terms of daily active users and monthly active users. I think on some of our games, in the space of a couple of weeks, we got to 5-6 million monthly active users, which was tremendous. But unfortunately, we weren't able to monetize those games at all. Literally zero, pretty much.
It's a fact.
So
it's a fact about the Egyptian market. Like we have many users, but we can't monetize them.
Yeah, many users, but no money. And at peak, what we saw clearly was that the only market we could monetize was Saudi Arabia. But even there are some challenges, which I'll touch on at maybe a separate point in this panel. And with Market VIP in e-commerce, what we saw is that almost half of our sales come from only one country, and that's Saudi Arabia. We're not present in Egypt because, not so much because of the revolution, but simply because of the fact that the customs in Egypt are extremely difficult to deal with. So when you're bringing products into Egypt, you really have to be very, very careful about that, how you deal with customs. And we felt that we weren't ready to tackle that challenge. So with Market VIP, right now, I would say we see, obviously, a continued opportunity in the Gulf to build a business and make it bigger. But we also see an attractive opportunity in Iraq. Initially in the north, in the northern part of Iraq, but over time, probably in the whole country. So because the demand is there fundamentally for a lot of what Market VIP offers. I've looked at North Africa as well. I've looked at, because we're talking about the MENA region as a whole. I've looked at Morocco, for example. Unfortunately, my perception of Morocco is it remains a very small market. And correct me if I'm wrong, but my data, I think, is that out of about 32 million people living there, only 15 million actually can read and write. So that means that your effective e-commerce addressable market is less than 15 million. And then your GDP per capita is about a third of the GDP per capita in Turkey or in Saudi Arabia. So you're really talking about a very, very small market.
So let me ask this. Arab world is very diverse, actually, both in terms of the GDP per capita of countries, in terms of the size of the countries, in terms of the resource endowments or the education levels. So can we talk about one Arab market, or is it fragmented? If it's fragmented, what are the main regions or pieces? What do you think?
Well, I would say, it depends on where you're looking at. If you're looking at e-commerce, then you have to have a kind of an operation in each and every country, and you have to deal with regulations. If you look at online services and online entertainment, for example, then you can definitely look at it as a single market for that sense. Also, if you look at mobile applications, and because there's a very big need in especially online content, because at the moment the Middle East is the fastest growing internet market worldwide. In the last half year, around 26 million new subscribers came on broadband. So the market is there, and especially the online market can be seen as a single market.
From my perspective, I also see difference between kind of production markets and sales markets. So you've got the Levant area, Jordan, Egypt, Lebanon, strong hubs for development, content creation, building startups, whereas GCC with high GDP is the place where people are selling. So it's not, it's pretty common that you'll find a company with most of its operations in the Levant with a sales presence in the GCC. And correct me if I'm wrong, Marca has most of its staff is not actually in GCC, right?
Yeah, so
you're selling in Saudi, but your company is based in Jordan, or initially was based in Jordan.
It was initially based in Jordan, although in hindsight, I'm not sure whether that was. I mean, it's great in terms of employing engineers to be in Jordan. It's great in terms of employing customer service staff, for example. But it also creates challenges because, indeed, as I think other people have said just now, it's truly not just one market. And for example, people in KSA in Saudi Arabia know that they're actually not talking to someone who's there. They know they're talking to somebody who's in Jordan for customer service, and that's not necessarily a great experience every single time. So I think in e-commerce you really have to be local as much as you can. For reasons of cost with Marca VIP, we've had to centralize certain things like customer service and technology. Obviously, you can't centralize. And from that perspective, yes, Jordan is a great base, but what we're seeing now is that as much as possible, we have to push whatever we can into the local markets, especially Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia is also a very particular market in that it is culturally very different even. And so, I mean, people, while linguistically everyone speaks Arabic, everyone speaks a different dialect. So if you pick up the phone and you speak to someone, you will immediately know that they're not from Saudi Arabia. So that is one in particular where I would say definitely you should have local staff in.
Pamir, can you compare Arab market and the EU market in terms of the fragmentation? Because EU is an economic union, but it's also fragmented because of the linguistic barriers, and Arab world doesn't have that union, but it's one language. So how does it compare?
I mean, I think you've summarized there are pros and cons. EU has a customs union, so you can shift products very comfortably across borders. So if we're talking about e-commerce, in the EU, even though you have a customs union, the reality is there are very few companies that manage to build a pan-European e-commerce business. Mm-hmm. In fact, I can't even think of any. Why? Because each country has a different customer service setup. Each country has a different payment card setup. Each country needs customized online marketing. So it's really difficult for e-commerce operators to operate in a seamless way across the EU. Mm-hmm. In fact, many companies tried and failed. And this, in fact, killed many companies who thought they could do that. In the MENA region, obviously there is no customs union, and shifting products is quite challenging, or at least it's very expensive. Whereas in, for example, in e-commerce right now in MENA, I don't think I'm sharing any secrets here. The average shipping cost with some of the local shipping vendors can approach $20 per shipment. Whereas in a place like Turkey, you're looking at $2-3 per shipment. Mm-hmm. Anywhere in the country, from Istanbul all the way to the Iraq border, the Iranian border. So at those type of prices, it's very hard to build an e-commerce business that's profitable. On the digital media side, which, by the way, I don't know as well because we haven't made any digital media investment in the Arab region, and I think my fellow panelists probably are better suited to talk about that. it's obviously you can do something that's pan-Arab. I mean, you see it with the TV channels and so on and so forth. So that's a lot more attractive.
For Egypt, I would like just to highlight 2 points. For the digital media, yeah, we have like one of 2 or 3 of the biggest digital media companies in the Arab region. Actually, one of the companies, which is Sarmadi, it got acquired by Vodafone in 2010. So now it's like a digital arm of Vodafone Egypt. The second point is mainly like the startup community, like from the point of, like how the startups see the fragmentation, how they can move to like other markets in the Arab region. In Egypt, we have like more than 2,000 computer engineering and science graduates each year. And we have like many entrepreneurs, we have very good startups, but it's really difficult for them to relocate or like open offices in like the GCC countries, because to open a company there, you should be like owned by 50%, more than 50% Saudi or Emirati or Qatari, which is a really big challenge for like Egyptian companies or Jordanian companies to easily move or open in the GCC market. This is one of actually the problems why fragmentation is caused in the MENA region.
Okay, let me come to Turkey. And Turkey is sold as a getaway to the MENA region in the international, press. Is it really so, or do you have anything more than the soap operas to offer to the region? I'm asking this because no one speaks Arabic here, and it's not really integrated. It's a similar culture, but it's not really integrated.
I think there are a lot of opportunities between Turkey and the MENA region, because there are some similarities, and people are looking at Turkish goods like the series, but also Turkish products. Today I saw a pitch of one of the e-commerce sites for Muslim fashion, and I think this is something. If you Arabize it and if you drive it to the right markets, you definitely can do a lot of things. We have done a lot of business with some of the Turkish entrepreneurs, where we looked at doing e-commerce from Turkish products to the MENA region, and I think there's a huge market for that.
From my experience, I've already seen a number of Turkish companies that are expanding into the Middle East region. One, Peak Games, which made an acquisition in the Saudi Arabian market. Another one is Yemek Sepeti, which has opened food on click in Dubai. There's a bunch of other companies that I know who were looking at starting a presence there, or definitely have some clients there that they're working with already. So I think that it's seen as a potential open market. It's far less mature than the European markets in terms of saturation of service providers. So someone who has a really good model that's very effective in Turkey can definitely find clients in the Middle East, especially from, if they're building mobile apps, especially if they're serving B2B. If you're building mobile apps for banks or for things like this, there's a big need for it.
Is there a Turkish entrepreneur here who made a useful business connection with MENA region during this event? Because there were a lot of entrepreneurs from the region as well. Emin?
I met Flat 6. So.
Well, I'm an incubation based in Ankara, and I met Flat 6, and Rames came to visit us, and he met some entrepreneurs, and there's always an overlap between the services. So we already have 2 or 3 entrepreneurs that can actually collaborate between Egypt and Turkey. So
yeah, actually, at the first 10 minutes or so, I just figured out that at least there's 3 or 4 startups in Ankara that we can connect with our startups coming out from Flat 6 Labs, or being incubated at Flat 6 Labs. And this is, I think we should go further with this, connecting startups in Turkey and in Egypt, or the MENA region. This is really important, and we should work on this together.
Yeah, I think one of the most successful things that I got out of this conference is we connected our entrepreneurs with Turkish entrepreneurs. For example, we have a social entertainment website. There was a Turkish company doing a YouTube-like infrastructure. They're going to connect together and really start trying to see how they can make use of each other's products. And I think it's much easier than dealing with European entrepreneurs or even US or Canadian entrepreneurs, because there still is some recognition and some cultural similarities. So I think it's a very good thing that we're doing the integration, or at least the partnership between Turkey and the MENA region, for a lot of possible cooperations.
Can I actually turn this just to the audience and ask to change the question around a bit? Who thinks here that, or who has an interest in the Arab markets, sees that their company might expand into Arab markets in, let's say, 3 to 5 years? If you would raise your hands just so that we can get a real sense of this as an opportunity. Okay, not many. So I can tell you that I spoke about this at Webrazzi, and there was an e-commerce event that they did. There was a significant number of people who raised their hands. Like, a lot of people were interested in connecting with the markets, and some of those people have since come to our events and sold to clients. So,
but weather was worse in Istanbul, so people were in the room.
I mean, I tend to oscillate between optimism and pessimism on that question, because on the one hand, I don't actually see a lot of synergies because the language is different, and the culture actually is different also. I don't think in Turkey we necessarily have a competitive advantage in terms of knowing how to adapt very quickly to that different language or that different culture. Having said that, there is a geographic proximity. There is a cultural proximity, even though the cultures are different. And there are some examples I think we've named of companies that have been able to bridge that gap somehow. But what I observe on a daily basis is it's not a walk in the park. Again, using the two examples that I know that at Peak Games, for example, it's not always been easy to deal with remote offices, especially those that were in the MENA region. Even the one in Ankara we have trouble with. I'm joking, but I mean, it's tough to work with remote offices in general. And in Marca VIP, for example, my observation is that the culture that developed in the company, maybe in the Jordan office, is very different from the culture that developed in the Turkish office. So it's actually not easy to make it work also on a day-to-day basis from the execution perspective. So yeah, and the other thing is when you think about it, Dubai or Riyadh is a 3.5 hour flight from here, from Istanbul, but Munich is a 2 hour flight. So if somebody really has a kick-ass global world-beating technology or business model, it may make more sense to go and try and do it in a country with a higher GDP per capita and maybe a faster adoption cycle. So it's not an obvious, going down the MENA route is not always an obvious decision, I think, for an entrepreneur in Turkey.
It's funny coming from a man who has a lot of investments in MENA, but I just wanted to make a quick comment, and this is where I highlighted agencies, actually, in particular. I see a lot of agencies that are going in there to serve clients that have big budgets. I mean, there are a lot of businesses with big budgets. So if you're doing B2B, maybe not necessarily for a very innovative global B2C startup, but I mean, I don't see those coming out of MENA as much as, and I don't want to insult Turkey either, but as much as I don't see them coming out of Turkey, right? I mean, we're all still an emerging market where we're doing a lot of copycatting. And as you're doing copycatting, you're hoping that you can grab enough market share in MENA, in wherever your adjacent markets, that you can be really interesting enough for someone else to acquire you. That's the model that I'm seeing most of the time. And even the entrepreneurs that I see in MENA who are doing really cutting edge things are often packing up and moving to California, where they're getting, Silicon Valley investors and trying to scale in Silicon Valley. So.
And by the way, that's the stuff that excites us probably the most at this point. We've done copycat stuff, and that's great, and there are great market opportunities both in Turkey and in MENA to do copycat businesses. But what really excites me personally the most now at this point are, I don't know, some guys in Egypt who have come up with some really cool technology and that could really build something global out of it, or the same thing in Turkey, or same thing wherever. That's probably what excites us the most at this point.
I just wish I would see more of them. There's like a level of sophistication that we need to get to it.
Yes. Any questions from the audience? Please. Elmira?
Omar, you just mentioned Arab companies packing up and going to California. Is there, because Istanbul is so geographically closer to the MENA region, and you do have quite a bit of an ecosystem already established within Turkey, will we see more Arab companies actually opening up and trying to start their companies in Turkey targeted for the MENA region?
I think that if you're going to move, you're probably going to make a move to Silicon Valley. If you're going to pick up and move all the way. And I think it goes back to depending on what it is that you're trying to build. Partly, I think that it's not just about the money, it's about the whole ecosystem, right? So you're going out there to be able to find the talent that's going to help you make this into a billion-dollar company. You know, the people with the 15, 20, 25 years of operating experience and scaling large businesses that you may not find certainly in the MENA. I think that definitely the Turkish market is more mature than us in that there are people who have been scaling their businesses for a longer time to hit the $100 million, $150 million revenue mark. I could count the number of companies in MENA who are doing that on one hand, and the number of companies who are doing that for more than 10 years on just maybe one or two fingers, right? So in terms of, that's what I call the challenge of collective experience. As an ecosystem, there is not as much experience within the HR, right? Mm-hmm. Not saying that also being in California, like people talk about innovation, and I see how, I go to California a lot. I have a lot of friends, I studied in the US, who are in California. And the way that I see their innovation coming is through a process of mutation, right? So it's like, oh, I want to run, I'm starting a Twitter that has some features of Foursquare and also, you know, has pictures like Instagram. And then all of a sudden they iterate, and eventually they end up with something quite far from where they started off with. It wasn't like they had a brilliantly innovative idea to start with. I think that often it happens accidentally or in response to the market feedback. I don't know, that's far away from where we started the question, but.
Any other question? I have a question then. It's a bit provocative. Which city or which country is the hub of the entrepreneurship in Middle East? Is it Amman, Beirut, Cairo, Dubai?
It's definitely Amman. I have to say that. So. No, but if you look at the figures,
I have to agree so far. Like.
If you look at the figures, last year there were 61 startups in Amman. The next city in the Middle East was Dubai, with 21. So there's a huge gap between the number of companies in Amman versus the rest of the Middle East.
I could take a stab at it, but my response will be different. I actually see Egypt as a stronger hub for at least potential, right? Mm-hmm. And so today I see a lot of companies coming out of Amman. There's a machine that is generating companies in Amman. There is a lot of support for the ecosystem there from private sector, public sector, and so there's a lot of people who are starting companies. I don't know how many of them are going to stick. So we can say Jordan generated 50, 70, 100 companies, but 2 years down the line, those companies may not exist.
That's why I've said so far. Like last year, we have seen like at least 200 startups coming out from Egypt, which is a huge number. A huge number compared to 2010, compared to 2009. So for the potential, I'm sure that Cairo will be like much better in the next 3 or 5 years, especially from like the capital perspective as well. Because we are seeing like Cairo, so there's like angel groups in Cairo emerging. There are like VCs and private equity firms starting to invest in early stage companies.
And that's exactly why I think also we have to really start not looking at what you asked. What's the hub for entrepreneurship? Because I think we have to really look at it from a regional perspective, where we really start cooperating. And actually, we started that yesterday. We discussed how we can work more closer with Flat 6 Lab. How we can get synergies, how we can get entrepreneurs from Egypt, talk to entrepreneurs from Jordan, how they can set up something, in the right market for the right company. So I think what we have to do from today is really start working on expanding the ecosystem in the Middle East, where we start really looking at even countries like Morocco, where there is potential and where there are entrepreneurs, to really connect them all together and start a kind of a regional ecosystem where people get access to mentors, get access to funds, get access to each other, and even create more VC seed funding, which is also regional, because the money is at the end of the day is in what you said, is in the Gulf, in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, in Kuwait. But the IT talent is more in the Levant area, and we have to bridge that gap, and we have to bridge that gap by cooperation and by partnering with each other.
I think one of the advantages that Jordan has is directly related to what I was saying about earlier, collective experience. Jordan, I mean, if you see PayPal spawned a whole number of startups that came afterwards. In Turkey, we're seeing very similar things, right? We are seeing successful entrepreneurs, then become investors, train in another class of emerging entrepreneurs. One of the advantages that Jordan has is that the big exit in the region that has happened recently was the Maktub exit to Yahoo. Those guys are based in Jordan, and those guys have now established and are supporting other entrepreneurs in turn. So this is one advantage that Jordan has over other markets.
In addition to an example function.
Right. And those guys who, through the process, have trained a lot of people, right? A lot of people have worked with them, failed with them, built relationships with them, learned from them, and now being mentored or funded by them.
Pamir, do you see Turkish investments going to the region in the near future, like Turkish angel investments or Turkish funds investing in entrepreneurs in the Middle East?
Not really, because it's not like there are a lot of VCs in Turkey anyway, and it's not like there are a lot of angel investors in Turkey yet. I mean, in absolute numbers, or when you normalize on a GDP basis. So I think and also I think venture capital and angel investing tends to be very local. People tend to invest in people they understand, they know, they've known. So I don't really see a lot of crossover from Turkey, at least, to those parts. Yeah.
The other way, from the region to Turkey? Any investments from?
Actually, like 2 or 3 of our startups, or the 24 startups of Flat 6 Labs, they are speaking with investors like here, or they want to expand to Turkey, like to start selling in the Turkish market, which I think we can start from there.
I think it's also a process that has to grow. It's something that again I had some discussions with, for example, Galata Angel and Angel Network, and we're looking also how we can benefit from their experience to see how we can do something together, and then things will come out of that, but it will take time.
So one thing that I see when I speak to global investors is actually a lack of interest in the Middle East at all. Partly because of what Pamir is saying, that there's not that many people who are tackling global innovative or creating global innovative companies. But I can tell you one thing that those investors are interested in. They're interested in Arab LPs. They're interested in family offices. They're going and they're raising funds from there. I know people who have their annual trips to Qatar and to Saudi Arabia to meet with their people who are writing them the $1 million checks. And there's a lot of them. There are a lot of people who are in the Middle East who are invested in Silicon Valley's funds. So one thing that we can think about is how to kind of package the deal to them to say, hey, come, check out our startups and check out our LPs at the same time, right? Another thing that I think is, when people, United States, let's say, looks at the region, maybe Turkey is not compelling enough alone, maybe MENA is not compelling enough alone. Package deal might be more interesting to them.
Although I have to say that over the last half a year, I think we had around 5, 6, 7 delegations from the U.S. investors coming to see the Jordan ecosystem and to see the potential of investing into the region. So
have they invested in any?
No, I'm not saying. I'm saying looking if they can invest in. So it's not done yet, but you're not sending delegations just for a vacation.
So from my perspective, I just can tell you in the course of doing business, since I run activities like Atome, I talk to investors and try to bring them to the Middle East. I have a really hard time getting them interested. Definitely Turkey is more advanced than we are here. Like a lot of these funds have now started opening operations in Turkey. So Middle East is a little bit behind.
We had a delegation and they invested. So
you were lucky.
It's a
we look forward to that as well.
Any other question?
But maybe I would like to add actually one of the interesting things is from an ecosystem perspective. On Monday, I have a Canadian entrepreneur coming to Jordan to explore how he can do business in the Middle East. So there is a lot of interest, mainly from entrepreneurs from Canada. We have interest, Spain, because Spain has a serious issue in their economy. They have a huge youth unemployment. So basically they have the same drivers to go international. So we see a lot of interest for them to come and sit with us and get, you know, the guidance from us as an accelerator to see how they can explore the Middle Eastern market.
Actually, I think we can start as well by Arab Americans who would like invest in Arab countries or like Arab startups. Like we have cases for like 2 angel investors, Egyptian American angel investors who are like interested to invest in our companies. So we can start from there as well.
I mean, you know, even though I'm maybe making slightly negative comments about the lack of crossover and so on, I do remain firmly excited about the overall opportunity in the MENA region, because on the digital media side, there are a lot of people living there. The internet penetration is booming, mobile penetration is booming. So there's no doubt in my mind that a bunch of people are going to seize those opportunities and build large digital media businesses. But my gut feeling is that those businesses will be obviously built by local people and probably funded also somehow by, you know, the local ecosystem. And echoing what Omar is saying, you know, our experience of raising the Series A from Market VIP was really tough, really tough. You know, I mean, most people were running for their lives when we said, "Do you want to invest in e-commerce in the Middle East?" And then we didn't get much traction from local investors either, because they just didn't think e-commerce would work in the Middle East. So, so it's, you know, yeah. But I remain excited about the opportunity for sure.
And the market is maturing rapidly. I mean, like I could tell you 12 months ago, there was far less interest from the telecom sector, for example, which is, have some of the deepest pockets in anything related to digital media and services. Today, they're all hungry for this, right? Vodafone in Egypt launched a corporate VC fund. Do has launched an API platform. STC launched a corporate VC fund, right? They're all really interested now in this space. So it's getting more mature, and watch out for us 3 to 5 years from now.
Ben?
I'm going to ask the awkward question. The awkward and slightly embarrassing question. There is, of course, an enormous internet superpower in your corner of the world. Is there any opportunity at all for MENA startups to work with Israeli startups, or is the politics of the region just simply too much of an impenetrable wall?
Actually, I researched that question. It's a great question. I went to Israel in December, and thanks to Usal, by the way, because he had built some relationships there, and he introduced me to some folks over there. And it was my first trip. I hadn't been before. I didn't have an opportunity to do it before, so I was quite excited about it. And so I guess, you know, there were 2 reasons for my trip. One was to reconnect with a whole bunch of people that I knew from my past life working in the mobile industry, and the mobile industry is very strong there as well. But also to connect with a bunch of people there who have set up some initiatives, and those were the people that Usal connected me with, designed to fund and build a number of startups that would actually tackle the regional market. It sounds very counterintuitive to do this out of Israel, but there are a lot of Arab Israelis also, and some of them, you know, are very bright. They would go to Technion, the best universities and whatnot, and are building their own businesses. So a bunch of funds have been set up there to take advantage of that. I'm no expert in the politics of the region. I'll leave this to my fellow panelists, you know, so I can't comment about that. But one thing I did sense is that talking to my Lebanese friends, talking to my, let's say, MENA friends after this trip, was they were like, look, we're excited about what goes on there, but we can't really be seen to get involved because it's just not possible, basically. On the Israeli side, what I heard is that, because the first question I asked the guys, so Pitango, which is a very well-known VC fund, basically, has set up a new fund to back Arab Israeli entrepreneurs. And I asked them, so I said, well, hold on, so you're going to build these, so they built one business in the health space. and it's actually growing like crazy. It's basically like a WebMD for the Arab world. And they're about to launch a bunch of other similar businesses. They're launching one in the weight loss space, again for pan-Arab audience. I also met a really bright entrepreneur from the Haifa area who's at the same time a professor at Technion, or assistant professor at Technion, who set up a business called DatuMate, which I believe has absolutely global potential. It's basically simplifying the work of surveyors, real estate surveyors, like making their work 20 times easier. So it's quite amazing. So I saw a lot of interesting things, but my question to them was, hold on, so you're going to set up this online health business for the Arab world, but then what happens when people find out that it's from there? So I believe that for that business, one of their strategies was to in fact invite investors from the region who may want to cross that divide and get involved. Again, I can't comment on that because I'm a foreigner to all of that, and nor do I want to get involved in the politics. But I found it quite interesting.
Any other response?
It's a very loaded question.
Has a nice perspective.
I think that undoubtedly Israel is an amazing model of building a thriving VC and entrepreneurial community. I've personally spoken about the experience of Israel in building this at a number of conferences in the Middle East, which definitely raised some eyebrows. But even though there is an animosity between the two parties, that doesn't mean one cannot learn from the other. Unfortunately, there are deep animosities and stigma associated with the subject. So that is a serious barrier to cooperation. I would say even these guys, to take the example further, these guys are setting up this business. What passports do they have? Are they Israeli passports? They're Israeli passports. They are going to try to sell ads. If they want to sell ads for this business, most of the ad dollars for Arab companies are coming out of Dubai. To fly to Dubai on an Israeli passport is impossible.
So they hire Jordanians for that.
So they hire Jordanians for that.
Yeah, so they set up an office in Amman. That's how they're doing it.
Right. So there's a and not we're not talking about the stigma now that may be associated with these people. We're talking about actual real logistical issues, right? And so there are challenges. I think that there's a lot that we could learn and benefit from such synergy. And you're not the first. I mean, the first time I set up our event, people immediately asked me, "Hey, so are you bringing some people from Israel?" And my event's based in Beirut. That is impossible. They cannot come here, right? Whether or not I want them is immaterial. I hope that was diplomatic enough.
Another question?
I'm asking all of you because I have met some women entrepreneurs here who they are very excited about their projects. What do you think about a woman entrepreneur? What will be the future, and how do they affect, the ecosystem in Middle East? Okay, thank you.
I can answer that very easily. I think we saw all the pitches here. There was one female entrepreneur doing a pitch in Startup Turkey, which was the lady Iman. I don't know if she's here in the room, but from Jordan. If you look at our accelerator, 40% of our entrepreneurs are female entrepreneurs.
For Egypt, it's a different case actually. You have like 5% female founders. Like out of the 24 companies we founded, 2 only like managed by females. Or
why are they doing positive discrimination? Or?
No, actually not. This is like just we choose according to like the quality of applications we get, not according to gender, whatever. That's why.
I have a different experience from Ramiz. We run startup competitions. Startup competition in 2012, our number 2 and number 3 were both women. Our competition that we ran in Egypt, number 1, number 2, and number 3 were all women. The competition that we ran in Riyadh, number 3 was a woman who pitched in niqab. And she has a great business, and I think she's a great entrepreneur. So I see a lot of
quality. Just the case, like the.
Yeah. Now there's a lot more men in this business, but that also holds for Silicon Valley, right? You read articles in TechCrunch and Mashable, why are there not enough women in technology? Why are there not enough women in technology? But I think that women are definitely building great businesses in MENA. Cordoba, Supermama.
But also very, very dedicated, high quality.
Yeah.
Any other question?
I mean, in Saudi Arabia, women outnumber men in universities and in performance in universities. So something to also think about.
I think the same case in Egypt as well.
Unfortunately, they can't drive after they get their degree. But
okay.
Won't that change though? If money's coming in, if people are going to be supporting these entrepreneurs,
Elmira.
follow that with the money, the regulations will have to change.
Such a complex society. You know, we just did an event there, and I can tell you a lot more about it. But I met women who I would meet with them on one-on-one in an in-person meeting. Their face was uncovered, and they were very progressive. And then at the event, one of them was a speaker. I couldn't even figure out who she was because I couldn't see her, right? In Saudi Arabia, going out in public, they're covered. They go to London, and all of their friends are there, and they're all uncovered. They get on an airplane. They take their niqab off. They're definitely in positions of power, but the culture is... these cultural norms run quite deep, and a lot of it is about how you are perceived by your extended family and by people who are quite conservative. We ran an event there in November. We had a mixed event, and we had a special permission to have a mixed event, and it was a complex permission to get. But I can tell you that, you know, we had tweets coming from sheikhs in a different part of the country saying, prevent mixing of genders at the conference. To the point where it went all the way to our government partners who were then holding us accountable for why there was mixing, even though we actually had a permission for a mixed gender event. So there's a lot of Western educated Saudis. There's definitely a wave of change that is hitting the country, but these things are very deeply woven into the fabric of society.